Good evening. I am Juan Maldonado, the newly minted, as you can see, City Bar President. I welcome you all to the House of the New York City Bar Association, with special thanks to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and to Barbara Babcock for joining us tonight for the Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg Distinguished Lecture on Women and the Law. Soon after the City Bar announced that I would be introducing Justice Ginsburg at tonight's event, one of my colleagues from work, who of course is in attendance tonight, politely suggested that it would be a good idea for me to learn more about this remarkable woman. And to that end, she lent me a copy of her treasured, notorious RBG, The Life and Times of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The book, in keeping with its artwork and with its title, has a somewhat irreverent treatment of incredibly important issues to our country. But the book also describes in very personal ways the course of persistent and determined effort through which Justice Ginsburg overcame the many obstacles placed in her way to achieve all that she has. There are two passages from Notorious RBG, though, that I think best capture the essence of the person and the jurist who has earned the respect and gratitude of all gathered here tonight. In the first, Erin Carmen, and forgive me, because I can no longer read without glasses, asks Justice Ginsburg, "And when the time comes, what would you like to be remembered for?" And Justice Ginsburg responds, "Someone who used whatever talent she had to do her work to the very best of her ability and to help repair tears in her society, to make things a little better through the use of whatever ability she has." And the final passage of the book really hit home to me. And in the passage, it quotes first from Justice Ginsburg. So these are her words. "In my life, what I find most satisfying is that I was a part of a movement that made life better, not just for women. I think gender discrimination is bad for everyone. It's bad for men, it's bad for children. Having the opportunity to be part of that change is tremendously satisfying. Think of how the Constitution begins." And here Justice Ginsburg quotes from the Constitution. "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." And Justice Ginsburg continues, "But we are still striving for that more perfect union. And one of the perfections is for the we, the people, to include an ever-enlarged group." The authors then conclude, "This expansion has been RBG's life's work, and it's not over yet," for which I would add, we the people should be very, very grateful. Please welcome Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Good evening. Before I introduce tonight's super lecturer, a few words about the new portrait recently hung in the back of the room. So if you turn... And that is my official portrait. It's also shown on the cover of my own words, a collection of my writings. As an official portrait, it will not be transported back from here to the court until I am no longer part of this world. And as I'm trying very hard to stay fit, I anticipate that the City Bar will possess that portrait for a fair number of years. The artist is Kim Beatty, who some 15 years earlier painted the portrait of me on display at Columbia Law School. Among other associations, Kim was my daughter's classmate in elementary school. I was asked to choose among several celebrated artists, but I chose Kim, appreciating what a fine artist she is. Our speaker tonight is Barbara Babcock. A first in so many things I can scarcely list them. In 1972, she became the first woman to be engaged in a tenure-track post at Stanford Law School, turning down offers from Harvard and Yale, the law school from which she graduated. Before that, before Stanford, she was the first public defender for the District of Columbia, and she launched that office on a secure foundation. During my years at Columbia, I taught from her civil procedure book. It was an innovative work because it started at the end with judgments and walked backward. Her other specialty at Stanford, women's legal history. With several collaborators, she wrote an exemplary casebook on sex-based discrimination and the law, published in 1975, and adopted widely at law faculties nationwide. Barbara took leave from Stanford in the Carter administration to serve as head of the Department of Justice's Civil Division. I would not hold the good job I have today were it not for Barbara. Barbara's efforts first to include me among potential nominees for vacancies at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. Her efforts involved persuading a not too enthusiastic Attorney General, Griffin Bell, and later Benjamin Civiletti, to advance my name on the list. And when President Clinton nominated me in 1993 to fill a Supreme Court vacancy, Barbara was again in my corner from the start to the finish. Barbara devoted many years of her life to writing the biography of Clara Shortridge Foltz, titled The Trials of Clara Foltz, first woman to be admitted to the practice of law in California. Published in 2011, it is a great work. I recommend it highly. In my review of the book for the Stanford Law Review, I wrote, "The Trials of Clara Foltz is the culmination of a quarter-century's effort to restore Foltz to her rightful place in the history of women's struggles to achieve full citizenship stature." It is a work of remarkable range and depth, a fitting tribute to a woman of unbreakable spirit who time and again refused to give way to despair or to take no for an answer to her pleas to be accorded the right to do everything lawyers do in our society. In 2016, Barbara published another book, this one about her own life as a woman. I brought it with me so you could see it. It is titled Fish Raincoats. Evan Thomas, a well-known author, among other books, he wrote Being Nixon, A Man Divided, and he is currently working on a biography of Sandra Day O'Connor. He wrote of Barbara's own story. For women lawyers, Barbara Babcock has led the way. How? By being smarter and tougher than men, also more empathetic and self-aware. Funny and shrewd, her memoir, Fish Raincoats, is a joy to read. As the book shows, Barbara has followed the counsel of U.S. Supreme Court Justice William Patterson, who served from 1793 until 1806. Patterson said, "Laugh where we can is one of the best maxims to pass through life with ease and comfort." Please join me now in a hearty welcome to Barbara Babcock.
Thank you, Ruth. How's that for an introduction from a Supreme Court justice that you really admire? Yeah. I, like many of the people in this room tonight, feel that I have traveled with Ruth Ginsburg on some little part of her improbable journey to iconic fame. I also feel that we have participated together in a great revolution in the legal profession. Most people, even many of our lawyer colleagues, are unaware of the revolution's scope, how much things have changed, and the vast potential that lies before us for even more change. I've called this talk A World Before Us, Young Women Lawyers of the Second Wave. I'll start by telling you what it was like at the beginning. When we were young women with the world before us, I first met Ruth in the early 70s, when we were each among a minuscule number of women law professors. She was the first woman law professor at Rutgers and then Columbia, and I at Stanford. In those days, we few women law professors all knew each other, either personally or by reputation. Some years later, when I wrote about Clara Foltz, the first woman lawyer in California in the 1870s, I was struck by how long before the internet, even before the telephone, women all over the country who wanted to be lawyers knew about each other and tried to help each other. The same was true of our early days in the 1970s, when we women professors and women lawyers were each familiar to each. It may be hard for you now in a room like this tonight to imagine a time like ours. When we went to law school, and even when we first taught, there were very few women in the halls, in the classrooms, in the curriculum. It did not matter that we were very smart, and some of us were even funny. No one was interested in helping us find legal work or advancement in the profession. We were on our own, and nor did we even recognize that we were part of a great women's movement, which would come to be known as the second wave. Not only were Ruth and I among the first women law professors in this country, but we soon began teaching the first courses that focused on women. We gave them simple names: Women and the Law, not complicated structures having to do with the meaning of gender or gender law and public policy. We also wrote books and articles and texts on the subject in the face of colleagues who questioned whether there would be enough material for a book or a course. Now we laugh to think about it, especially because the whole time Ruth was in the courts, most notably the U.S. Supreme Court, bringing the cases that would supply plenty of material for the books. Another story that we share with other early women law professors is that we did not set out to be feminists, much less feminist law professors, but rather we fell into it, or rather we were pushed into it by our students. Ruth Ginsburg was interested in civil procedure, particularly as practiced and developed in the Scandinavian countries. And even further afield, my interest from my earliest days was in studying and practicing criminal defense law. I was the director of the Public Defender Service in Washington, D.C., and Ruth Ginsburg was teaching procedure when a delegation of students came to each of us. They wanted a course in women and the law, and none of the regular faculty at Georgetown, where I was located, or Rutgers, where Ruth was teaching, was interested in teaching such a course, or even willing. And so we both became feminist law professors, by necessity, because no one else would do it. Ruth was at the heart of the movement's planning and the litigation, and sometimes I wondered where her choices would take her. The legal profession, as you all know, has a well-demarcated path to the best honors, and small cases about sex discrimination, even in the Supreme Court, did not seem to lead to great heights. From the first, I admired her courage, but I did not think it would reward her personally. Certainly, I did not think her interests and efforts would place her at the top of the profession. Here, I failed to take into account Marty Ginsburg and the remarkable Ginsburg marriage. Toward the end of his life, Marty, a renowned tax lawyer, told a friend that the most important thing I've done is to enable Ruth to do what she has done. Marty did not live to see Ruth rock and roll, though I'm sure he would have applauded that too. My personal story about Ruth and Marty has to do with participating in his campaign for her appointment to the D.C. Circuit, which then led to the Supreme Court. Ruth did not ask me to do it. Marty called. He did not argue her case, but simply assumed that I would do all I could because Ruth and I were on the same team, part of the same great movement for women's rights, one of the small but ever-increasing band of feminist law professors, law professor feminists. When Marty engaged me to aid in Ruth's appointment to the D.C. Circuit, I was Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Division, and the Attorney General asked me to find some women for the President to appoint to federal courts, as if this involved a harrowing and difficult search. When it came to the D.C. Circuit, the Attorney General said, for once, there were plenty of available women, so we didn't need to dig. We could even find someone to suggest other than Ruth. He was tired of hearing Ruth suggested. In his papers, and I didn't know about this until recently, is a note in Griffin Bell's papers that I wrote to him explaining that women were not fungible, that for a very visible appointment that could lead to the Supreme Court, it had to be Ruth. I cannot exaggerate the feeling among women lawyers that all increases in numbers or victories are Pyrrhic if Ruth is not appointed. It will be a slap in the face that a woman who is so well qualified and more than any woman applicant in the country has paid her dues is not chosen. That was the kind of political language Griffin Bell understood. He recommended Ruth. Tonight, I've told you a small piece of one story of women's progress in the legal profession. How a middle-class girl from Brooklyn, without wealth or political connections, who came of age when women could not even imagine being judges, much less Supreme Court justices, rose to the top of the profession. There are a number of second-wave stories, perhaps none as soaring or dramatic as Ruth Ginsburg's, but still of interest. These stories need to be written and read, studied and applauded, understood and beloved by lawyers and feminists. It is a task we are only now beginning. But as usual, we have Ruth Ginsburg to lead us and the world before us. Ironically, though women lawyers have progressed further in the past few decades than in all earlier years combined, the profession in which we have finally come close to gaining equal opportunity seems to be falling apart. Needless aggression and soulless unconcern about societal consequences is the indictment from the outside. Internally, the complaint is that our learned profession has become a bottom-line business. The legal workplace is built on the 10-hour day, the 6-day week, extreme hierarchy, constant testing, and all-out competition. Everyone from the freshest associate to the graying partner works too hard, leaving no time for family and communal life, for leisure, or for labor devoted to the public good. In greater numbers than their male counterparts, the women who now make up half the new entrants to the profession do not want to live like that. Indeed, they are abandoning the practice of law in disproportionate numbers. Many men would also prefer a life that allowed for familial engagement and public service over the course of a career. The reform project to make that possible is, I believe, underway, though so far mainly in the efforts and accomplishments of individuals. Yet their models and the sheer numbers of women lawyers with their male allies could change everything, and it could happen fast. In the spirit of one of my favorite slogans from the earlier phase, the personal is political. What you do, how you work out your professional and personal life is not, or not only, for yourself. So I say to all of you, men and women, On to the barricades for the rest of the revolution, for the real revolution. The world is before us.
Thank you very much, Barbara. We will now take questions for the audience addressed not just to Barbara Babcock. Can you hear me? Okay. So we're going to now take questions from the audience addressed not just to Barbara Babcock, but also to Justice Ginsburg. Do we have persons with mics available to? Okay. So first question, Your Honor.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I am
She's speaking into a microphone.
thank you.
If she's speaking,
It's an honor and a privilege to be here today in front
I
of
can't
you.
hear.
I am an ex-welfare. I'm an ex-welfare recipient that I'm now in law school. I was abused mother. I am an abused wife that I got divorced from my husband because I pursued my dream of being a lawyer. And I am inspired by you and Justice Ginsburg to do what I am called to do, which is to be a great lawyer. And I seek your wisdom and your guidance on how I can fulfill my dream, although it was deferred, because I am a grandmother, 55 years old. But yet I am inspired by you and Justice Ginsburg to fulfill my dream of being a lawyer and being a great lawyer to represent my clients, the ones that have actually experienced my pain and my heartache of being an abused wife and a single welfare mother. And I definitely want to hear wisdom from you so I can fulfill my dream of being that great lawyer.
Ruth, you want to?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that the first thing, I think that being a lawyer is a wonderful, wonderful job. It's just a wonderful thing to do. And the first way to fulfill it, and you're well on the way, is to think about how you can use the skills that you have and that will increase as you continue in the practice, to use it for other people. It's amazing the need there is for lawyers. All kinds of people need help, and they need a lawyer's help, and you can find great satisfaction in doing it. Though I have been teaching for many years, and I love to teach. What I miss having clients, and I miss having people that I can change their lives. I can make things happen. My father, I tell this story in my memoir. My father was a lawyer, and that's what inspired me to be a lawyer too. But I used to. At night he would come home and he would tell the stories of his day, and he would say, "Barb." There were other people at the table too, but he always addressed me. He says, "Barb, a lady came into the office today and she had this problem." And then he would tell the story of the lawyer as hero, how the lawyer took care of the problem. And the lady left the office without the problem. And I thought, this is magic, and I can do this. I bet you I can do this. And you can do it. You're already on the road because you want to do it. It really isn't, if you think about the law as not about making a lot of money, though that's possible too, but if you think about it as helping people, it's a very great profession.
Over here and over there.
Here. First, let me say thank you to both of you for all you have done to pave the way for so many of us in the room. Too often we forget how hard it was for women like you to do what you did to make it easier for us to become part of this profession. So thank you. I have two questions. One is, do you have any thoughts on what we can do to overcome the decision in Citizens United, which has had such a dramatic impact on our political landscape? And two, any thoughts on what we need to do to continue to work on increasing the ranks of women in leadership positions in the legal profession?
Citizens United can be changed in two ways. One is a constitutional amendment, and our Constitution is powerfully hard to amend. The other is litigation leading to the court's change in position. And there already are some cases challenging parts of Citizens United. I think that the dissent in that case will one day be the law of the land. It won't be swift. So that's for Citizens United. And the other question about what can women do? I'll quote what my colleague Sandra Day O'Connor said about that. She said, get out there and make a good show. Because the more women that are out there doing things, the more women will believe that they can do things. So that would be my answer to your second question.
Thank you, Justice Ginsburg and Professor Babcock. I'm over here to your left. For all of your inspiration. I have your first book, Professor Babcock. I got it when you were at the National Association of Women Lawyers meeting many years ago in California. And I'm looking forward to reading the second one. I'm going to follow up on the last question and something that Professor Babcock said earlier. This association, the American Bar Association, NOL, numerous women lawyer groups have studied why women are leaving the legal profession early on and later in their careers, and also produce surveys showing the stagnation of women once they get into partnership ranks, not moving up into leadership roles. And interestingly, in this city and slowly across the country, a lot of judges are responding to this by including in their rules very specific directions about giving opportunities to younger lawyers, including women, but also moving women into, in the courtroom, first chair roles, whether it's an appellate court or a trial court. Do you think that those sorts of efforts by judges can become more pervasive and can help? And if they can, how can we as lawyers try to get that message out there to district courts and circuit courts beyond New York City.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the answer to that is, except that, you know, don't say no. Don't give up. Just keep trying. That's all I know. And I think when I look at the successful careers of women particularly, that has always been the key. No matter what the obstacles were, people just kept up the effort, kept trying, and I think that's all we can do. We're making progress. I'm horrified when I see that women are leaving the profession in larger numbers than men. But I just say, let's gather the men allies. We have a lot of them, and let's work on it. We can do it.
One place where you might go is to the American Bar Association, which now has a woman as president. Sometimes we are rather provincial about what's going on in New York. I'm not sure that there aren't other places where there are similar efforts. But I think an appeal to the American Bar Association would be in order and would help spread that kind of effort nationwide.
We have persons here and here.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. This is quite an honor for me. A little overwhelmed. I've dreamed of asking you a question for many, many years, and I can't believe this is the one I'm going to ask. But I'm a 33-year-old single female attorney, and sadly, the question I get asked most often is if I'm getting my eggs frozen, because I don't have children, and I'm supposed to, apparently, at my age and at this place in my life. And I do find myself at a crossroads in my career. Do I move on and become more powerful and advance my career, or do I stay where I am and, you know, try and develop that other side of my life as well? And I'm personally find myself stuck. So your talk tonight actually hit a note with me about that, because I don't know which way to go, and I would love to hear your advice on being a young woman in the law and wanting to advance your career, but also know that apparently the clock is ticking, so they say.
Neither Ruth nor I really are young anymore, but I would really say work on your career, and you can do other things at the same time, but the career the career is the important thing to get, because you will get better. You get better at it the more you do it, and so that's what I would say. Don't give up on that. You might find other things. There's so many things you can do in the law. You might find other things to do, but concentrate on what you would call your career, and don't let people convince you that you're not being a real woman if you do that. you'll always, if you're a good lawyer, and you're getting better all the time, you'll always have a meaningful, good life, I think, and that's the thing about our profession that knocks me out. I just say hold on to it and try to get better at it, and then maybe you'll be a Supreme Court justice someday.
There was one question here, there's one there, so we've got several. So, and we have time, we're good. So why don't we start here, and then we'll just go around the room. There's one right there. We'll just go this way.
Good evening. It's an honor and a privilege. I'm an employment attorney. And in this moment of reckoning in our country over sexual harassment and retaliation, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to take stock of where we can go. And it's not the first time a disenfranchised group of people has had to do this, whether our country has faced this issue in terms of race or sexual preference or any other sort of category that makes a group stand out as less than. How do we take ourselves from being whiners and thin-skinned and complaining instead of bucking up and putting our pants on and going to the dinner meeting to transform it to just seeing us for the contribution that we have to make?
How do you go from being a whiner to being transformers that you want?
Whiner?
Yes.
I was never a whiner, so my approach in ancient days, the 70s, was to realize that I was talking to an audience that didn't know that such a thing existed, that gender-based discrimination. So I saw myself as kind of a kindergarten teacher, even to the Supreme Court justices.
Over here?
But I think of just one of the many women for whom I had great admiration is Bella Abzug. She applied to be a member of the Supreme Court Bar in 1876. She was turned down 6-3 for one reason: she was a woman. I have a replica of the Supreme Court vote sheet on her. So what did she do? She did not whine. She lobbied Congress relentlessly for 3 years. And in 1879, Congress passed a law saying women who possess the necessary qualifications must be admitted to the Supreme Court bar.
Over here?
One of the most striking things that you said tonight was that your students 30 years ago were calling for a class on women in the law, a subject that seems vastly complicated now and something that I would imagine takes a number of courses to teach. But what I'm most curious about is what you both think is a course that our world is calling for right now. What you think your students or the students that are just citizens of the world or the people who are in this room most need to learn about given our current climate and given the issues that the court is facing today.
That's wonderful. A wonderful question. I can't even begin to. You answer it, Ruth.
Barbara, you are the teacher, so I think this one is for you.
You know, one of the things that I do think about is to let what needs to be learned and what needs to be taught, the lesson let it come from the students. They know what they want to learn, and I remember when I had these students who were volunteer investigators for the public defender, and that was how I knew these students, and they were in my office, and I said, and they wanted me to come teach this course because they couldn't get anybody to teach it, and they were very cute. They said, "We have a syllabus. We got it from NYU, and if you would just come and teach it." And I said, "Listen, you know, I do criminal defense work. I don't know anything about women in the law and sex discrimination and all of that." And they said, "This way you'll learn." and I do think that there is. I think the students, you can't. They know what they need, and that's one piece of advice that I would have is listen to them and try to respond to them. It was when I think back on those early days of women and the law and our aspirations for the course, we went through every course, every subject matter in the law, and said, so how does this affect women, and what effect does it have on women? And I always thought that, you know, this is just sort of weird way to have a course where you teach every course, only concentrate on women, and to call it Women and the Law, it's so almost simple. Like I was thinking, like, you know, it'd be like the law and elephants or something. I mean, because it was everything. We were teaching everything, and but anyway, that's what I'd come back to is see what people need, what they're coming for, and try to give it to them. And you'll learn something yourself too, probably.
There were two forces that were working on me. One was the students, and I must say it was not very hard in the beginning to understand at least what was out there. I went to the library, and inside of a month I had read every federal decision that had to do with women's rights or the lack thereof. I think more is produced in a month now than existed. The other pressure were the new clients who were coming to the ACLU. One was pregnant school teachers who were put on what was euphemistically called maternity leave. It was unpaid leave, and the women were told to leave the classroom much earlier than they needed to, in the 5th month. The excuse given was, we don't want the children to think their teacher swallowed a watermelon. Well, these were teachers who said, we are ready, willing, and able to work. We can work up to the 9th month, and we don't want to be forced out. Another group were women who had blue-collar jobs and wanted to get health coverage for their families, and were told health coverage, family coverage is available only to a man. A woman can get single coverage. That's because the thinking was the man was the breadwinner who counted, and the woman, if she worked, was a pin money earner. So it was the new clients and their problems and the students wanting the course that propelled me into becoming a feminist lawyer.
have more questions.
Hello, my name is Sadia Ghazi. I'm here with my friend Mei Yang. We are corporate associates at a big law firm. We went to law school with big aspirations, and somehow we ended up doing big law. I will admittedly say that. I worked at the DOJ my first 1L summer, thought I was going to do big things. And now, 3 years in, as I've worked intense 90, 100-hour plus work weeks, and we worked really hard to make it here on time to see Justice Ginsburg speak and Barbara Babcock speak. We have your books, and we talk about it all the time, what we as women want to do and aspire to, but the realities of life set in. It's a really simple question. I just want to know, looking back on all the things that you've done, all the magnificent achievements that you've achieved, if you can give one piece of advice, it doesn't have to be big and profound, looking back, as you're sitting here today, what you can give to young women like us, what's one thing that you would tell us that you would do differently or change to make it where you've made it today and still feel like you look back on your life and said, I've done something big with my life, but I've also been really practical and achieved big things, been there for my family, but also paid the bills for law school and all the other things that reality sets in, and that's what you have to do.
Well, the thing that I love teaching, and I am always glad that I did it, because it was the women's movement that carried me into teaching, because there was a time, and it was in the early 70s, when most law schools had never had a single woman law professor, and they all wanted one. They wanted me. I had this feeling, but at any rate, that's not true anymore. But I'm really, and we have women deans, even Harvard Law School. It's something I thought I would never live to see. It has had women, has a woman dean, and so we're making tremendous progress. And I think of all the things that I've done, though, and as much as I have enjoyed teaching and teaching these wonderful students that I've been privileged to have, I miss having clients. I miss having clients, people whose life I can change and make a real difference, and talking to juries, having clients and talking to juries. If you found something that you really love doing it, if you don't give it up for the next thing, or at least look for something that just really turns you on in the law. There's so many different things to do in the law, and that's what I would say is look for something that literally you can enjoy, that you enjoy doing, and then there's not a lot of professions and businesses where people can say, I had a good time today at the office, but you can do that at the law if you find the right place. So. don't know. I don't know. I couldn't, I really don't. The only thing I can say is that look for something that you really enjoy doing and do it. Yeah.
Do we have a question up here?
Thank you both so much for being here. It's an honor to speak before you. I wanted to ask you, in the era of the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement, what is the next step that the legal industry and us as lawyers need to take in order to perpetuate this movement and provide for, the pillow for this all to land on? It seems that we've made the noise. Now, where can our legal system step up in order to support this system? This revolution, rather.
I didn't get the question.
Can you summarize very quickly? I'm sorry, I distracted Justice Ginsburg.
What is the next step? What do you think the next step is for women and the revolution that we want to bring about?
For the legal system specifically to support the Me Too movement.
I think we've seen some wonderful things in this current year. One was the Women's March. Women of all kinds coming together and saying, we want to advance the opportunities for women, and we want our government to be responsive to that. I think the march has stimulated other efforts. And then this, Me Too? That was unbelievable. This has been going on forever. And all of a sudden, people in positions of power are taking note of it and doing things and telling people who have been very bad actors, we don't want you anymore. That has been a phenomenal development. One other thing I'd say is look at the number of women who are going to be running for office in the next election. I mean, that's another thing that gives me great hope.
Bless you. Two more questions.
So I just finished my first year of law school. It was rough. It was tough. I made it. And before going to law school, I came from the journalism field. So I know what it's like to work in an industry where women are not taken as seriously as the men. And it's disheartening to hear from Professor Babcock that women are going through these 3 years of tough, grueling classes and then leaving. What it seems to be from conversations I've had with other female attorneys is that there comes a point where they have to choose between family and their career. There might be other reasons as well, and I'd love for you to possibly expand on that, but what can us young lawyers, women and men alike, because men have to be just as great as allies to women to get this done, what can we do to stop this pattern of women leaving their careers that they strived and they worked for so hard?
I would just really say is deny the choice. It's not a choice, that's really being, that's being imposed from the outside. But remember that it really does make a difference what you do and how you work it out. I really do think how individuals live their lives and combine or give up one or the other if you want to. What you don't have to do is an example and changes everything, changes things for other people too. So that's what I would say. But.
Thank you both so much for speaking to us and for taking our questions. As everyone said, it's an honor to be speaking to you. My question is, I guess, a little twofold. So I'm a new attorney. I was recently admitted this year, and I've gone through law school and life looking for role models to look to, both male and female, in different aspects of my life. And as you both have kind of discussed all night, and as we've been hearing throughout the past times, that women in law is starting to become bigger, but as you first started, there weren't that many role models for you to look to who were female in the law. So my first question is, who did you look to as you were moving through the ranks and becoming new lawyers and new female lawyers and expanding times as they are now, and why did those people impact you and impact your decisions in life?
Well, I'm a little older than Barbara, and I can tell you there weren't any. That women weren't on the bench, they weren't in law school. So my heroines, one was fictional, the other was real. One was Nancy Drew, that was fictional. And the other was Amelia Earhart, who was real. But when you think about the federal courts, the first woman appointed to a federal court was Florence Allen, appointed by Roosevelt in 1934. Women were one-at-a-time curiosities. The first woman appointed to a trial court was Bernita Shelton Matthews, who was on the D.C. District Court. She was appointed by Truman in 1948. After Florence Allen retired, the next woman to be on a federal appellate court was Shirley Hufstetler in 1968. So the women didn't appear in numbers on courts until Jimmy Carter's administration. He had only 4 years, but he was determined to change the complexion of the U.S. judiciary. And that was by putting women and members of minority groups on the courts, no longer as one-at-a-time curiosities, but in numbers. And he appointed, I think, over 25 women to district courts and 11 to courts of appeals, and I was one of those lucky 11. No president went back to the way it once was. Reagan, not to be outdone, wanted to appoint the first woman to the Supreme Court and made a nationwide search and came up with a great choice in Sandra Day O'Connor.
And I had the same feeling of that there weren't any women lawyers. There were none for role models. In fact, it was a long time before I even heard the word role model. But I didn't, and the few that I met, I didn't like. So that it was not. It really was like there was a lonely feeling to it, to setting out, and people thought you were strange. I remember in law school, a friend of mine, who shall go nameless because he's here tonight, but he explained to me that the men, in my class, there was 170 people in the class, which was the usual number, but there were usually 5 or 6 women. That was the number out of 170. And in our class, we had 13. And it was a cause of great concern to the men. And a lot of them thought that it was because some of the women had male names. One of them, who was from the South, first name was Battle. So everybody said, oh, they thought she was a man, you know. But my friend explained to me that there was no such thing, honestly, when I was in law school as a law school romance, because the men considered that any woman who went to law school was frigid. That was the worst thing you could be in the 50s or 60s, was frigid. And but it was, and that's why I particularly these days with my students, I love to see. There's lots of romances, and I love to see them loving each other and admiring each other and helping each other. It's just really changed. But it does. I think it makes a huge difference to have other people in the profession and other women to look up to and admire, and it just helps. So that's what. So be one.
So on behalf of the City Bar Association and everyone gathered here tonight, thank you very much to these two wonderful role models for everyone here. Have a good night.